Okay, great. Welcome back. We're all refreshed and ready to rock and roll. So Patrick, we are now at clothing and household expenses. And I'm just cognizant of our time, and I think we're making great progress. And as Patrick said, just before we went on a break, he front loaded the heavy discussion here. So let's go to clothing and household expenses.
Yes, so this should be, I think, a pretty quick one where you can basically say yes or no. But in, again, coming from the conversation I had with the auditor, one thing that was identified is that for the household expenses piece of this, so you remember we take the household expenses, but we remove a couple of categories, one of them being miscellaneous household equipment. And a lot of that is like, your lawnmower, weed whacker, that kind of stuff. Which if you're a renter, you probably don't need to have. So, but within that miscellaneous equipment are computers, which in particular, if you have, kids who are in school and they need access to a computer to do their homework, you might consider that to be a basic need.
It's a basic need in a 2023 economy.
So we have a proposal for how we might estimate this. Basically, we go to several, computer makers' websites and find they charge for a base model computer. And we amortize that over 3 to 5 years, somewhere in that range. I know when I was in college, my computer was kind of spent from use after about 3 years, but now that I don't use the laptop quite as much now, probably has a longer life cycle to it. So it's just a consideration that from that perspective of how long you do it for. But just as an example, if we say a basic laptop from Dell or whatever costs $800 and we amortize that over 5 years or 3 years. So 3 years would be $22 monthly. And then 5 years would be about $13 monthly. So we're not talking about a significant change in what the wages would be, but it's more of I guess, accounting for that this is the cost of something that people, I think broadly is considered a basic need for a lot of households.
Yeah.
And it's currently not included.
It's currently not included, and I don't think it's a question mark. It is a basic need. And what is more interesting is that it's actually probably a basic need for everybody who lives in that household, not just one computer. So it would be,
I will say a lot of times schools are providing students with laptops. So my 8-year-old in kindergarten received a tablet, which was terrifying to me. But
make you feel better about your property tax.
oh, absolutely. Well, he goes to a school in a different town, but but yes, it does. But so he's been able to keep that from kindergarten to, I think he's getting a new one next year. So schools are providing that for some kids.
I think so too. And so one would make sense
Okay,
as a basic.
fine.
Yes.
Putting it out there. So you're recommending it doesn't really make, and it can be sort of incorporated into the budget as we have it at the moment.
Yeah, we put it under the clothing and household expenses category, which already exists. It's just through the existing methodology, it's excluded. And, I think that in today's age, I think almost everyone here is on a computer right now.
Let's
We're
go
trying to look at you.
Yeah.
let's go with the 3-year amortization though.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Does the phone plan include a $800 phone in it when you're doing the?
Yeah, so a lot of plans, like you get the upgraded phone and they just add whatever to your plan going forward. So it's accounted for in that way. Yeah. Sort of indirectly.
Okay, so you don't need to call that. I think let's just note that it's included in the household expense without having to call it out on the spreadsheet.
Yeah, we'll just add it into that number.
Okay, so we're all agreed. So we're going to 3 year? Great, perfect. Personal care products.
So personal care products, I alluded to this earlier, but it is something that has not been included in the basic needs budget in the past. And if you look at the consumer expenditure survey, this spending category includes things like toothpaste, shampoo, hygiene products, for the most part. So, basically what we would propose here, is that you do going forward include this. But so the consumer expenditure survey includes personal care products and services. So that'd be something like, you get a massage or a pedicure or something of that
Haircut?
nature. Right, right.
A haircut.
So that's something, again, is not included, but by doing this, we would that include it.
I think that,
Yeah.
So basically, this is following essentially the same methodology that we use for household expenses. We say, okay, we're going to take this number, but we're going to remove services from it. Which again, specifically like the manicures, pedicures, massages, that kind of
I
stuff.
think a manicure or pedicure is an essential item.
Right, which what I'm suggesting is backing that out, removing it. So this would, again, we'd use the same income ranges and target the same tables and do the same approach for a regional adjuster that we do for other categories. So again, this is just, we'd be using a data source that we currently use for other categories. It's consistent in the methodology as those other categories. We're just removing that piece and adding it as a new component to the basic needs budget because,
And you would peg,
sorry,
and you would peg it to what?
we've used the consumer expenditure survey. So that's something that gets updated. They release a new one every single year. So it would never be an issue of,
It'd just be interesting to see what that is because we do personal needs allowance for people in nursing homes. And those are widely differing, I think right now it's $72 a month. So I'd just be interested to see what.
yeah, I haven't done the actual calculations yet, but I'm just putting forth an approach that is consistent with how we approach other categories. But I certainly could, it's for the single household, I could.
I mean, for the single household right now, in the 2022 study, the clothing and household expenses was at $155 a month for urban and
Right.
and the same with rural. That's in total.
I just would.
Yes, but just as a point of reference. Yeah.
And personal expenses would be different from personal care expense.
I will follow up with you with an estimate.
Yeah.
Right, personal expenses was at 107.
Yeah, that's our $5 conversation we had earlier today.
Yeah.
And this is personal care products, which is different from personal expenses. That's all I'm trying to point out.
Yeah.
You're talking about adding another component.
Got it.
So as long as you're recommending that we include another component, I guess I'm okay with it. Because what we're trying to do in some measure is make this simpler for JFO so that JFO will want to continue to do it.
In the constellation of things that are hard and things that are easy, this is something that would be easy.
Okay. I am for one supportive of this concept. Anybody else? Anybody on the screen want to weigh in?
Following the index makes sense. Simple.
Thanks, Aaron.
I totally agree. I like this concept.
I'm on board too.
Okay, great. God, that was the quickest decision we've made so far. Let's then move to our much bigger discussion.
Yes. So as you know, we use Chittenden County as our proxy for urban and we use the rest of the state as our rural index. Specifically in statute, where this also comes into play is that the statute actually tells us that we need to take for the 2 adult no kids household, we need to take the urban and rural number and average them for the official livable wage. So that's something that's in statute. So I guess keep that in the back of your mind when we're talking about whether we continue with the existing approach or we suggest that we go to 1 or 3 regions.
Or what?
Right. Because because that particular directive is in statute, that's something that would have to go through. That's not a JFC decision. That's something that has to go through the legislative process. So I'm just throwing that out there as something to keep in the back of your minds. But so, I mean, I guess coming back to this discussion, that means that when we do that average, the official livable wage doesn't directly apply to urban or to rural. So.
It applies
Be a little-
to an averaged Vermont.
Right.
Right.
So, I mean, you could recommend only making one of them the livable wage. You could recommend not having the distinction. You could, I mean, there's multiple recommendations you could have. One thing to the discussion prior about, sort of there being a 3 sort of region division in the state.
3 cost
Centers.
for the,
From a purely data and analytical perspective, it's not, we can't get to that level of granularity, unfortunately. It's just not available in the survey data. Whether, not because it doesn't exist, just because it's not something we can access.
The difference personally that I see now, all of this other stuff, transportation and everything, all centers around the cost of housing. The cost of housing is driving the cost for everybody. And it's easy to find, our agencies produce numbers about the average cost of rent by county and all of that pieces. And I think when I look at housing, there's no way that I can say that there aren't differences between different pockets of the state, whether it comes out. And I think to put out one number that doesn't recognize the different costs of housing now is not being realistic from my point of view.
So that's interesting because I would take what you have raised as a concern to actually drive us to just doing One Vermont for a bunch of different reasons. People who are driving more often work in an urban setting and often have their kids in childcare near their work. So I think Vermont is much more fluid than just urban rural. I increasingly think of it as a One Vermont because the cost of insurance is the same. The cost of childcare is increasingly the same. The cost of housing, as Richie says, is very arbitrary. I mean, it isn't just urban rural. I live in a rural town that is just ridiculously expensive to live in Woodstock. And the cost of transportation is, you may be earning an urban salary, but you may be living elsewhere. I think the distinctions are now so blurred in terms of looking at your costs in any kind of encapsulated fashion is just no longer how Vermont is functioning. And so I would love to have us think about, and actually it's triggered by, in many ways, your original thought, Richie, is that makes me think we actually really should be recommending just one and not, if we're already averaging on a bunch of stuff, I would recommend we move to just one. Sean, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks. I think Senator Westman's points are really good. I've been thinking about them a lot too. And the example of Eden, and I think in so many of the places where the jobs are, people having to drive further away and finding the housing. I think also the points of having all that data, the county data. At the same time, I think as you're saying, Senator Clarkson, I think with that moving away from the urban rural, I agree with that as well. It seems like particularly since all the points we've made with just being Chittenden County and that not being urban. I mean, I think to me in thinking about the signaling, where I'm going, I'm almost wonder if there's a middle path. You know, having one statewide that's not urban rural, not making more work for JFO to do the additional kind of county-based pieces, but having a couple pieces that could be signaled to employers for some county-based adjustments or bringing in the affordable pieces. To me, though, it's not just housing, because I think the transportation part comes in. And in my ideal, again, kind of getting beyond things that maybe are easily done within this methodology, but kind of my dream world, it wouldn't be an urban rural switch, but it would be a car dependent, not non-car dependent switch. In other words, if an employer is set up in a village or in a downtown with adequate housing around, it would be conceivable to not be a 2-car family, or to be car free, which would be a lot more affordable. And where with the current configuration, you're kind of setting up that if a business goes out where land is cheap and people have to drive, and you're having more sprawl, it's going to be more affordable to them, and with that kind of same wage. And in my ideal, would love to see the housing brought in, would love to see kind of the transportation piece in there, and whether some adjustment or some factor could be given to to employers would be something I would love to move to. And the last thing we just say was, I think as far as the basic needs, we've talked about the basic needs budget, but I think it's also a question is whether that sense of, is it a basic need for people to be able to have the option of living, to have housing available within X minutes of their work, so they aren't forced to drive an hour to somewhere. It doesn't neatly fit in, but I think as we're thinking about the broader kind of goals and what we're communicating as basic needs, in my mind, just seeing with all the data that's coming out with hybrid and remote work and how much people value it more to not have to be driving so far, I think there's a value there that, again, maybe doesn't get incorporated into this piece, but would be great to be on the radar. So apologize, nothing super workable, but I think the short answer, I'd be game to going to a one statewide, dropping the urban rural, but looking some way to factor in the things that Senator Westman and others are saying.
Can I just say, Sean, what I am saying is, I think all of the other issues now are circling around the housing issue. The transportation, it's not that it isn't an issue, but it circles around the transportation.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I would say where you live and where I live, we're all communities.
Yeah.
Fairfax was one of the fastest growing.
Are you looking
towns.
for me? What's up? I'm just,
We're just commuter, Cambridge, and we all drive.
Well, I actually think sadly, most of Vermont is doing that now, because in the Upper Valley, most people are commuting to Hanover, to Lebanon, to the law school, or to the hospitals. There's a huge amount of commuting, and our urban centers our more urbanized centers are where people are working and maybe where they have their childcare, but they're not necessarily living there. And for different reasons, affordability is a huge piece, although I would argue that most of us are not moving at all right now, because, who wants to leave that 3.1% mortgage and try and do anything else? And Ashley knows exactly what I'm. So you're absolutely right. But also our policies that we have just enacted are really, and that we're continuing to try and do as we reduce our carbon footprint, is to live more and more in a clustered community and try and drive down the amount of commuting that people are doing. So that is part of, all these things are in play, and which is why I would tend to look at a sort of one Vermont budget.
But do we have to then go to the legislature to change the statute?
Yeah, so in the report, you could make the recommendation that we move to this, but yes, that would have to move through the legislative process.
But it's all, anything we do is hard to.
Some areas like changing what data source you're using, that's something that can just be done using JFC approval. Although if you remember back to our first meeting with Damien, there is a failsafe in this particular bill where if, you know, we're not able to get this in front of JFC in time for the next report, the recommendations within the report would take effect.
Can I just ask a question? It's
Yeah.
more for my personal knowledge. So MIT and EPI, they both do urban and rural, correct?
So MIT specifically, they have a figure for each county in the state.
Okay.
Although because of the data that they use, many of the counties are all the same exact thing. So they have one for each county and they also have one for the Burlington MSA. So mostly, yes, the same kind of urban rural difference.
I'm curious, did you happen to talk to the auditor about this? I actually don't know where he stands on this.
I did. And if you remember, so maybe it was the second meeting that we talked about this, but one of his recommendations actually was because we have this in statute that we're averaging between the two and it doesn't directly apply to either. His thought on that was that we should not have one livable wage. We publish one for urban and one for rural. So that's the only specific comment on this fact that I've heard from him.
They're not average, but maintain urban and rural, but just not do an average.
Yeah, but I also haven't gotten any indication, I don't want to speak for him.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten any indication from him that he would disagree with this. Yeah.
I know, we're getting close to the decision point, and so I'm just trying to understand unintended consequences and of if we were to go to one
So
versus keeping it at
for our next meeting, maybe we could ask both the auditor and JFO to think about what some of the unintended consequences might be before we make a final decision.
Well, so let me just show.
Oh, gosh, we haven't finished your urban rural.
Yeah, so there's really going to be only 3 categories that are affected.
All right, that's what you already got.
For every category outside of housing, transportation, and childcare.
And
It's the same for rural and urban. You know, already in each of these categories, well, already for housing and childcare, we're doing a population weighted average for each county. So the data available for those categories is on the county level. So what we do is we take the populations and do a weighted average that way. If we were to move to one, all we would really be doing is for all of these categories, doing a population weighted average for all the counties, not just all the counties that are not Chittenden. So, I mean, the broadly speaking, what's going to end up happening is that in these 3 categories, there will be some instances where the number is going up a little bit, some instances where the number is going down a little bit. But, you know, I think
it's a bit of,
I think you're well, yeah, I think in this discussion, you're well equipped just to think through the fact that, you know, it's everything you've been saying with the fluidity of where your work is, where you're living. There are a lot of commuter towns.
well, and as Richie has pointed out right from the beginning, was rural real estate is as expensive as anything in an urban setting in many of our rural towns. Sorry, Liz.
It's okay. So I guess I would sort of lean towards keeping the urban and the rural as it is, whether we average, I guess I don't really have an opinion on that, but I think there's an assumption, right? I mean, and again, this goes back to who's going to be using this, right? There's an assumption that living in Burlington costs, like the people who work in Burlington should make more money because it costs more. Like and whether or not that's really true, you know, but that's your job, right? Is to tell us, right? So, and we do see that there are differences in the 2 costs of living for those major categories. And so, you know, as is the assumption, which I think is wrong, that the Northeast Kingdom is cheaper,
right?
Right.
And so therefore we should pay people less in the Northeast Kingdom, right? And so I just think there's a value to keeping the urban versus rural.
So where is the value then if we're assuming it's.
Right. Well, that-
I don't,
yes.
that your argument is undermining your.
It is, right. No, I know. But rural is not, rural transportation is more expensive, right, than urban transportation.
So,
Not necessarily, because you have.
No, but on this, in this.
so an interesting quirk with this year's report was that the official, so the 2 adults, no children household, the rural livable wage was actually higher than the urban for the first time. And the reason for that had to do with transportation. A large part of that had to do with transportation and the slight change in methodology in the data source that we use.
Sean and, or Richie, did you want to say?
No, after Sean.
Okay, Sean.
Yeah, I found that last slide really helpful, almost crystallizing what I think I apologize was kind of rambling with the last comment. But it crystallized what I'm thinking with really those 3 bullets being, as Patrick pointed out, are differentiating. I think whether we do the one state or the, or the urban rural, and I actually agree with his point a lot I think for perception, I think I would flip to doing the 2. I think that perception piece to address it head on is a really important one. But I think for this, I think we've talked some about, Ellen and others have made the point of also thinking about how the report's laid out and communicated. And I think whatever we do, having these components, that housing cost assumption, the transportation cost assumption, and the childcare cost assumption as being 3 that really differ, can differ from county to county. And having those figures out there, I think would allow a business that you're looking at or a person who's using it, whatever the case may be, say, okay, well, they use this housing assumption here in our county where this business is located. I mean, you can't find rent for that. Or conversely, we actually, there's all these apartments available, probably not now, but some point ideally in the future. So I could see going back and having those numbers addressed could be quite useful for users of this tool.
Thanks. Yeah, I just think those 3 categories are increasingly blurred. I just don't see any distinctions between. Yeah, Ellen, what are you thinking?
No, Aaron.
Oh, Aaron, sorry. So Aaron. Oh,
It's
Richie
okay.
first, sorry. Richie and then Aaron.
So when I first joined these meetings, I had said that I was in support of combining these 2 topics. But the more that we've talked about it, my reason for that was that it's challenging to find compensation data between these 2 categories. And so that leads me now to change my opinion and say this is an opportunity to continue to address those differences and be mindful of that as an employer and those considerations of someone potentially coming to the area, relocating within the area. And so to that, I do agree that we do have a means right now to continue to evaluate these 2 areas separately for employers as another resource.
Richie.
So first, I'd say in the category, we just had them urban and rural categories for childcare. And the difference was when we talked about single with 2 children, 40-37 versus 34-45, which is a huge difference. And when we get through this process, and if we produce a single number, what does someone in
Peach.
Peachum or Lowell say, well, we aren't Colchester, and and they made no distinction between Lowell or Peachum and Colchester. And so why should I look at that number? Or if you're in Colchester, you say, where do we fit in this? And, so I think at the end of this, we're playing to an audience. And what is that audience going to say? And they're going to say, this doesn't fit, because the big places are, they average to all the big places.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Can I make one more argument too for keeping them separate is that I've used this over the years behind the scenes for grant writing. And there's often a distinction between like the rural and city. So like in terms of like, if you're trying to get a grant, if you're trying to get a grant because you are in a rural area, having more concrete data is helpful.
What you thinking there, Mistress Kim?
I've always thought keeping them separate was very useful from a conversation, like being able to, for believability as well as being able to point out the differences.
Yeah, it's so interesting and I see less difference. I see it, difference just diminished rapidly. Where that person is working in Lowell. Where is that person in Beecham working?
Yeah.
So Elizabeth Burrows, you have said nothing. Go for it.
I just have a couple of things. One is, I think I brought this up the last time we talked about rural versus urban, and that is the distinction between what we're using and the census data. The US Census in terms of what constitutes rural versus urban in the first place. Windsor, Vermont is considered urban according to the census data. So, and the other thing I would say is that just to throw it into the mix, that I think that in areas where there are clusters of population, the actual economy is different. In rural areas, it's more service-based. And so that might be something to take into consideration as well.
But we're all making some assumptions that if you live rurally, you work rurally, which most people, I would argue most people don't. That you may live in a rural area, but you may not necessarily work there, nor may you have your childcare there.
That's true.
Aaron.
Oh, just to piggyback on a remark that was previously made, I do think that from an employer's perspective, by not defining these two categories, we risk employers potentially applying their own lens or their own filter to the information, to the point that was made of going, well, this is all of Vermont and we're this part of Vermont. And so we could probably look at this a little bit differently.
Don't you think they apply their own lens anyway, Aaron?
It's less, for various reasons. It's very possible. But if we're talking about location, then if we provide that information already divided, it's one less opportunity for people to make their own assumptions about it.
Thanks. Richie, how are you feeling?
I think I've been pretty clear. I think there's different.
Yeah, but some of what you said would argue that rural living is as expensive as urban living.
I think when we go to take a number out, if people don't think that we have dug into the differences between the rural and the more urban, or the job centers now and those places that aren't, that they're going to look at the number and it's easier for people to dismiss the number.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like, and Ashley, where are you weighing in on this?
I really think, and it's because of where we live, I think we need to differentiate between rural and urban. I'm just thinking, food, and obviously we don't consider the differences in food between urban and rural, but I'm thinking, so in Fairfax, we have Steeples Market. I could go there. There's a lot less options. It's incredibly expensive. There's they're phenomenal, but it's really expensive. Or I could go outside to Chittenden County to Essex. I have to then get in my car, drive all the way there. It's 20 minutes, do the math for gas. I think we have to make a differentiation between the two. So they're definitely blurring, absolutely. I don't think anyone is disagreeing there. But we have to look at that there are differences. And I think I personally would want us to be as transparent as possible. And I think that is how we do it.
And Elizabeth, you are the only one, I think, who hasn't weighed in on the difference on where you land on the urban versus rural, keeping both or going to one Vermont.
I think keeping both. I mean, I think that when I think about rural Vermont, I think about really rural. And the difference between a place that is actually really rural versus being able to go around the corner to Target. And I think there's a big difference there.
And what percent of Vermont is really rural anymore?
I don't know.
I mean, I think it's minuscule. I mean, it's the Northeast Kingdom, which is our most isolated area of Vermont in some ways. And that is, to me, still the most rural, but all the rest of us live very suburban lives, in my humble opinion.
I don't
Maybe
agree.
not
I
stars
mean, look at the southwestern part of the state. That is rural.
I don't think so. I think of the Adirondacks as rural. I don't think anything in Vermont is very rural
I
except,
think Northeast Kingdom is pretty darn rural.
I mean, Vermont is so suburban. It is just, I guess I come from this from a point of view of, yeah, you're right. It's not living in Boston, but it's not.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think
I think it sounds like Sean and I are the holdouts for one Vermont and that the rest of you
No,
are
I already,
strong believers in
already-
maintaining.
I already flipped in my last comment to the two.
Oh,
Vermont.
okay. This is not unusual, as we know, not an unusual situation.
So, I would say, I don't think it's just the Northeast. If I look at Franklin County, it's entirely different living in Bakersfield
Yeah.
or Montgomery or Richford than it is living in Fairfax now. And Fairfax is very different than Florence.
Absolutely.
Okay, it sounds like we're keeping urban, rural, and it sounds like actually what I'm hearing from the committee is that we're keeping urban, rural, and maybe not wanting to do the averaging for only one Vermont
So
livable wage and have a livable wage,
urban and rural.
urban and rural. Is that also what I'm hearing from everybody?
Well,
But that also requires statutory.
yeah,
change.
I think.
I don't care.
I think it's statutorily required to average.
I care, but.
I don't like it.
Statutes are made to be changed. I mean, statutes can be changed. That is our job as legislators. If we feel that it needs to be changed, that's our job to advocate for it.
yeah, I mean, it would go into the report as a recommendation from the committee, which would, JFO's job in the next session will be to present this report to the relevant committees. So
But I think in this report, you have to average.
Currently, we average, but I don't think we have to.
Two different reports. The report that summarizes the recommendations.
That's a recommendation.
Separate from the basic needs budget report. So it would,
He's not gonna be redoing this for this next session.
yeah, all the changes will apply to the forthcoming report, which we'll be writing next summer.
Yeah.
But if we feel strongly that we shouldn't be doing an average, that we should have a urban livable wage and a rural livable wage, then I think that's what we should ask, that we should advocate for that and go for the gusto. I mean, I don't have any, I think we can argue that pretty successfully.
Okay.
What are other people feeling? That's my, just the gut sense I'm getting from this group, but am I wrong? Are you wanting to keep it averaged? Because the point of maintaining urban and rural is modest if you're gonna just then average it at the end.
Right,
Just saying.
yeah. Right. And this coming in the 2022 budget, the differential was 44 cents an hour between urban and rural.
Oh,
This isn't much.
Because we're defining the livable wage as 2 adults, no children.
Well, that's
Married.
one of our next conversation points, which is we both have components to discuss, categories. But at the this first discussion, I think is an important one. So for the moment, I think our preliminary decision is to maintain our urban rural and to instead of having an average livable wage, have a livable wage that's calculated urban and separately for rural.
Yep.
And if anyone disagrees with that on the screen, please let your opinion be known now. Okay, I think,
So as a rule, I don't do math in public, but 40 cents an hour over the course of the year would be a little under $900 annually.
so relative.
Roughly the size of the child tax credit. Okay, so I have my notes on what you're thinking there. We are getting close to the end. So I just wanted to have a couple of slides. You've already seen both of these slides. It details the analysis I did with
Okay,
this.
so are we now moving into the discussion of categories and what categories we may want to keep, what categories we may want to expand? My distinct feeling, in all honesty, going into this is that JFO was hoping to simplify this and reduce the number of categories. Am I wrong?
It's always a plus.
Right. So
In this particular case, Madam Chair, though, it's the last bullet, I think, is where Pat's trying to go, which is around.
I just wanted to summarize the conversation. Again, this was something I talked with the auditor about.
right, I understand, but I'm just saying, we're now wading into a decision we're going to have to make about the number of categories we want to keep and or do we want to change the categories? And so now we have 6. Keep in the back of your mind, we may want to try and move it to 4. And what are those 4? And then, but first we're going to have this particular conversation about 2 adult households without children, which the auditor has been very keen on.
Yeah, so this is just to say that I know last meeting, there were some technical difficulties. So I had a conversation to sort of walk him through what was done, what I did with the census flat files. And he is content that the methodology used was appropriate. And so I guess that's just to say that the numbers you see before you now, you know, we had a conversation about.
Pretty,
So,
we're doing that.
yeah.
Even though it's not very many people.
Well, this is sort of the subcat, this is a particular household configuration amongst the 6. So yes, we're talking 30,000 households overall, but this is sort of the target household that we're talking about here. So when we say there's, you know, over 200,000 households, this is actually going to be a larger slice of the pie of the target demographic that we're looking at. So in one lens, it seems kind of like a small number of households, but really we're talking about the target here.
Got
So as part of the next section we have here is other considerations. There's some very brief ones that a couple of them I wasn't sure if we'd made a final decision on, so just wanted to revisit it. And then there is within that the discussion of family configurations and whether you want to maintain that. But just going in order, when we talked about telecommunications, we talked about the survey that we have, the fact that people are moving towards being mostly reliant on their cell phones, and you know, the fact that we're using that sort of blended average based on the survey. The question I just want to pose to make sure that I have, you know, we can put a point on this is whether you want to continue using the survey which has the combination of landline, only cell phone only, a combination of the two, or given the proliferation, if we wanted to move to just considering the cell phone cost, which does matter if you make the change because a cell phone plan is more expensive than a landline.
I was gonna say that, that's more expensive than. So, I mean, I think, well, what do people feel about this? Because I think a lot of Vermonters maintain both. Look, 32% maintain both because we all know that if the power's out for a long period of time, you're sort of screwed. Yes, sir.
In my job of, at VSAC, overseeing the college savings program, I do a lot of school open houses. 2 weeks ago, I drove to Craftsbury. And once I hit the Northwood, to the Craftsbury School, there was no cell phone service, period, in the sentence. If I walked into Craftsbury and said, I'm only gonna do cell phone, most of the town doesn't have service.
So on that anecdote, I had the same experience last night. I was on a call planning for the trip to Taiwan, and I had to call one of our members back on her landline because her cell phone service is so terrible. And we couldn't have the meeting without using a landline. So, Sean, you have a thought.
Yeah, I fully respect that a lot of the state, right, cell phone service isn't good or adequate. The reason I think back to Pat's point though, with, including it bumps the number down. So really in my mind, I guess it seems like the pro for keeping it the way it is would just be blended, would be the consistency with past years. I think that consistency is good whenever it can be kept. But I guess the question maybe back to Pat and JFO would be, is that more work doing the blended piece? Because if it is, I think moving to the just using the cell phone use and being able to put that caveat, that acknowledgement, to the point that both of you just raised, somewhere in the report, making that note. We know there's parts that don't, but the costs wash out. Whatever the case may be, I'd be fine with that either way.
Right. And to add to your point, Sean, I think that even if you don't have cell service at home, you probably have a cell phone. So what that doesn't tell us is how many Vermonters have cell phones. They may not rely on them at home, but they, I would say a vast majority of Vermonters now have both or now have cell phones, and maybe not a vast majority keep their landlines. But what is it, Pat? Is it a lot of extra work to do a combo? Because otherwise, you're right, it's more expensive. We'd be averaging up if we did the assumption of the cell phones.
Well, I think the response to that is kind of two-pronged. The simple answer is just, it's not really that much extra work. The second piece though is I don't have a sense of what the sample size in the CDC survey that we rely on is. So I can't really comment on, these percentages that we're using are perfect. But one thing I will say, and I'm just trying to give you all the information, is that they do redo the survey. So if, next time they do it and we're not at 68% anymore on using cell phones only, we're at 75%. That'll be reflected in the estimates. But I think it kind of comes back to, it's sort of a philosophical thing for you to think about more so. And do you consider a cell phone to be a basic need in the sense that, it's being factored in here that we're doing the blended average, but if you say yes, cell phone, that's a more expensive plan than a landline.
Right.
So it does bring down the cost. So I think it's kind of a philosophical conversation, something that could be sort of teased out over time as that percentage increases. Or if you just decide that you think this is a basic need that everyone should have access to, you want to make that shift.
And yeah, I think it is becoming slowly a basic need. I mean, not slowly, it's, I think, very much a basic need. And people expect you to be able to be communicated with wherever you are, which is a little irritating, but true. So, I mean, I think it's a basic need, whether everybody is able to. Elizabeth Burrows.
Hi, I think it's a very basic need, even more than internet
Yeah.
connection, actually, because I think a lot of people use cell phones when they don't have internet connections.
Well, only if they have. Yeah, well, right.
Well, I mean, they can go somewhere where they have, I think assuming that most people have a cell phone and that they can go somewhere where they have a cell phone connection versus internet, which is also
Yeah.
very expensive.
Yep. So, it sounds like we include cell phone as, and then you can make a note, as Sean suggested, we can make a note that landlines are still prevalent and important, but.
So moving to cell phone only.
Yeah, and then because that cost will take, that's a higher cost.
Right.
And it's, I think, probably a fair cost to include in a basic need.
I think we're all striving to get to a place where landline will be phased out completely. But
I love my landlines. But, you
we're
know,
moving.
we're very old fashioned.
I think we're moving to that place though.
I think
It
we-
might be a different answer 2 years from now.
Got it.
Okay, so got two more things to talk about, and then I will run through all the decisions that we've made.
Yeah.
So we have three things to talk about because we have to revisit something. So I have next year the family configurations conversation, but if we can just hold on for that for a second. I think the simpler thing to talk about for now, and I think this sort of piggybacks on the conversation we've already had about the childcare subsidies. There was a question raised whether we should still be including the child tax credit, the child independent care credit. And what I've done here is just, and this is an estimate, this isn't perfect. There's going to be other things that'll, tweak a little bit here, but this shows you for each of the households that apply or that are eligible for the credits, what their livable wage would look like if we removed them. So you'll see here that in each case where they are eligible for these credits, their livable wage would need to increase, right? Because we're taking away money that goes into their pocket from the tax credits. So we need to make up for that in their gross income. So I guess the purpose of this slide is just to show you what kind of effect that would have if we removed them.
Can you explain? I guess I'm a little confused. Like go to the single two kids one.
Sure.
Okay, so you're saying that rurally they make 72,900 plus 9,000 in taxes. So their annual, but then their annual income would, I'm looking down at the bottom left quadrant. Single two kids.
I only see single, I see single two kids.
Yeah, so then annual income with tax credits, what does that mean? With tax credits?
Okay, so I guess I'll just run through each line.
Yeah.
So the annual expenses, that's the basic needs budget. That's the amount that they're spending on each of the components we're talking about.
That's what you need to live.
So that is basically, that's net income. So that's the income they have before or after paying taxes.
Okay, yeah,
So then what we're doing is we're showing in the next line what the taxes they're paying are, which gets us to that third line, which is your gross income.
82,090.
So, and I say with the tax credits because that is reflecting the current methodology, which includes the tax credits in them.
Okay,
You'll see in that next line that,
Wait, I don't see where you see 82. I see 75, 282.
so we're in the table with single two kids.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're looking at the rural line or column, excuse me.
Okay.
so can I just clarify, federal and state taxes actually includes those credits, that 9,000?
Yes, so that number there is including them. Sorry, I guess I could have formatted this a little better.
Okay.
But the 1,864 is the total value of credits that this person is eligible for. And so when we remove those credits, they actually need to earn a higher gross income in order to after, like get their net pay that affords the basic needs budget.
So this person didn't get the $2,000 tax credit per child? Is it, no, it's not 2,000, it's 1,000 when you're single.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's, and the age of the children is important too, because we have a 4 and a 6-year-old, but only 5 and under qualify for.
Oh, when you're talking, this includes the state credit as well. So this includes the federal and the state credit. Okay, gotcha. Okay, so 83. I think we need to include the credits. Why would we have them if we didn't? The whole point is to bring people's incomes up. That's why we have credits.
I think that's basically where we landed earlier,
Yeah.
earlier this morning was
With the sub.
With the subsidy.
keep them in on both the revenue and the expense side.
I think if you're looking at it from the perspective of an employer, this is what, like, including them reflects, current policy. If the legislature was ever to make any changes to this, it would flow into the report and it would make that adjustment, so. And the income, I think, it goes up to 175,000 for the child tax credit. That's even higher in most cases than the 575% of federal poverty line, which is the eligibility level for child subsidies. Yeah.
All right.
So, feelings from the screen, anybody? So you're proposing that we keep all the tax credits
Yeah.
and taxes. So my idea of just a cost is going out the window. Okay, got it. Only a fool doesn't change their mind. The screen, anybody on the screen that have thoughts? Anyone in our virtual participative?
I don't have any new thoughts.
Okay, do you agree with keeping the tax credits? All we need is, we're sort of at a decision point here about.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment from earlier. as
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Aaron. Sean and Elizabeth?
Yeah, I agree as well.
Wait, can I just ask again?
Yeah.
That I agree with everything, but I just have a question. Did we just say that when you're single, for the federal child tax credit is the same as a married child tax credit, 2,000, or is it 1,000?
So the Vermont child.
Not Vermont, federal.
Expired.
But no, there's still a federal child tax credit though.
So it is factored in based on whatever the filing status is in the income. So we're running it based on how it's structured federally and what you qualify for. Does that answer your question?
I don't think.
I can't remember what the child tax credit is right now. Like,
We
what is
could
the child?
find out in a heartbeat.
The federal, so there was a federal child tax credit that was part of the.
Right, but not that.
That one's gone, and you can still claim them as dependents.
Right.
There's the dependents is housing credit.
Right.
And there's the child and dependent care tax credit, federal level and state levels, I hope.
Oh.
Before. Not the.
That's, I think, what you're talking about.
That's the one, and I can't remember what the value of that is.
But I bet Emily's going to find out for us in a heartbeat.
Dependent, I think is 2,000.
I think it's 2002. Married or single or both?
I think it doesn't, I could absolutely be wrong, but I think it's
Well, Emily is going to find out for us.
We just want to make sure, you're just saying, make sure that it's in there.
Yeah.
Right?
Because I know it changed, but this 2022, was it in 2022? I think it was.
I mean, it will reflect, when we go to write the next report, it will reflect current day law.
Okay, yeah.
So if there needs to be an update made there, that's not a methodological change. That's just an update to reflect changes in the tax code, right?
And I know there's like fully refundable and partially refundable, but if you're making this amount of money, you're getting the full credit, which I think is 2,000 per child.
Well, for the dependent care credit, it's based on how much you're spending on.
I mean, child tax credit. Like, there's always been a child tax credit. It just went up during COVID, and then it went back down to the regular child tax credit, which was,
Having any luck?
which was, it went up to like 3,600 per kid or something like that. And then it went back down to,
Well, the methodology for the report is to reflect current day laws.
Yeah.
Whatever changes.
I don't, yeah, I don't,
It would be. Okay.
Okay.
The child tax credit for 23-24 is $2,000 per child.
no matter whether you're married or single. Okay. That's
Ashley.
So then I'm, okay, so then,
It depends on your so, like, right? Your modified adjusted gross income is $400,000 below, you're married filing jointly, or $200,000.
yeah, but you still get the 2,000. That's why I don't quite understand this less credits on this slide here. That doesn't make sense for two children. 1,864.
Sorry, I don't have the
That's fine.
report in front of me, but the main
That doesn't seem.
point
No, it's a slide. It's your slide.
to look
Have
at,
the data.
the report will actually have by line item what each credit amount is, but
Here, I will pass.
the main point I want to make
If he makes-
is just that
Always include.
it will always include any changes that are made.
Yeah. This is,
If we decide to include.
I think we should include enough.
yeah,
It's a big amount of money.
Yeah, it's in there.
It's in,
It's in here.
it's in the tax calculation.
No, I know it's in that one, but I don't see it in this thing. I don't understand this. That's fine. It's.
Pat is saying it will be included.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that it sounds like you would like to continue to include the tax credits. So if we're fine on that point.
Yeah.
The last thing there's two things. The last thing for now, is that, just the second bullet point here on whether you would like to talk about, like which family configurations you'd like to have in the report. And before we get into that, I'll just say the last thing is to circle back to transportation, just to finalize which of those three options you would like to, considering that we've just had the urban.
I think we said if we keep urban option one, transportation. Averaging it, that's my note. And then if we go to One Vermont, option 3.
Okey doke.
I think that's what I had written down. Is that what I thought that's what you had said.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
That was clear.
Okay.
So we'll talk about family configurations. Once we put a pin on that, I will walk us through all the decisions we've made, just so everyone remembers between last meeting and this meeting. And then that'll be all that I have for today. So I guess I'll just leave it with you if you'd like to discuss the family configurations. Right now, there are 6. I can remind you what those are, if that would be helpful, though I think many of you have the report.
We have,
Looking on the back side of it.
Oh, yeah, they're on this sheet that I provided.
and they're right here in a big
Yeah.
type in the reports. On page. What page is it?
7.
It's interesting. There are no page numbers. Oh my God, right in front of me. Page 7 of the report, if you have it, has it. So at the moment, we have single person, 1 child, single parent, 2 children, 2 adults, no children, 2 adults, 2 children, with one of them being the wage earner and one working for free, and 2 adults, 2 children with 2 wage earners. So the question in front of us is, are these the right categories? Do we want to try and simplify it to 4 categories, which would make it simpler and slightly easier for JFO? And what are your thoughts on this? Also remember that the 2 children in both cases of the 2 configurations are assuming children that are 4 and 6.
Sorry.
Sean?
Yeah, just sorry to answer a question with the question, but do we know of any of the, places it's being used around the state? Do they tend to lock on to 1 or 2 or 3 of, of these scenarios? Like, it's hard to imagine all six kind of being
Right.
used actively. I'm just curious.
It's a good question, and it's a good question in Aaron and Ashley, who are our two HR professionals. It would be interesting to know that, because in some ways we could just have one category, which is single person, and then just travel it from there. But anyway, Aaron and Ashley, do you want to weigh in on Sean's question?
I'm sorry, Sean, can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. And my question was just, to the extent that the basic needs budget's being used and the the wage is being used out there in the state, I was just curious if there's, a couple of these that are used, or if people really are using all six. It just, or which ones are most locked onto.
All six of the configurations?
Yeah.
The categories that we
Or if people
currently
look
have,
more
the
at,
six.
Yeah, if people look more at single, do they look at, if the single and the single parent with two children requires the higher wage of these, do they look at that and the single one because that's the most common, or, or kind of how are they used?
Yeah, so in my experience, the livable wage is not used right now in that determination. So when we're thinking about, I think that having a broader range of categories would be most beneficial, because we as an employer are going to be thinking about, is this person going to be on our health insurance? Do they have a spouse with insurance who they're going to use? And so that marital status matters at all. We do tend to look at all of these considerations and have an open dialogue with candidates and team members about these factors going into their compensation. But I think that that's future application more so than how it's presently used.
To just go quickly to how this is currently used, because we had originally hoped to have the Vermont Business Social Responsibility, BBSR, Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, and the Vermont Business Roundtable. Had asked them to weigh in on how their companies and their members use this, and neither of them chose to weigh in on this. Is that correct?
They had other commitments that they were unable to.
But they didn't supply us with a response.
I'm expecting to get some written, it wasn't in time for today's meeting.
So, given that we didn't get that, I would turn to Aaron and Ashley and also Ellen to hear about what companies that how they use it, because it goes to this question, I think, in part of the categories.
I mean, similarly to what Aaron spoke to, I have never heard of the basic needs budget until it came into my committee last year.
Well, that answers that answers it big time. And Aaron, you use it sort of?
I think that the transition from looking at compensation strategies from being a minimum wage conversation and over to livable wage is proactive. I think it's a little bit more new age when it comes to compensation strategy than we've seen historically. So I've seen it, but I'll say that I'll add the disclaimer to that. It's usually, I've seen it used by companies who are being very competitive with the way that they structure compensation in the way that they're going about talent acquisition. So a smaller subgroup. So I'm thinking about like the best place, the places voted best place to work statewide and nationally. Those are the organizations that are taking this into consideration.
And I think additionally, we always talk about how Vermont is very small business oriented. And a lot of times they don't have the administrative capacity to really dig deep into these conversations. And I think minimum wage is readily available. So they just hone in on that and say, okay, well, we know we legally have to provide our employees this. I think most employers would say, yes, we want to do more. We want to make sure our employees stay, but they're also at a capacity where they're like, they don't know the tools that they have.
Okay, thanks. Ellen?
I have always found it to be extremely helpful to have the full range of family sizes because people tend to think about their own circumstances when they look at numbers like that. And they'll say, oh, well, you know, my kids are this age, so I pay more for this line item than that line item. So there's a value from a standpoint of when you have just sort of like one number or two numbers, it's easier to write things off, right? It's more work to do this, but if we go with the lower number all the time, then we're not doing anything to really raise awareness that actually even the lowest numbers are too low,
Oh, yeah.
right? So by having the higher numbers, meaning because of the family sizes, it helps employers to orient about what does it really cost to live? Because if you're let's say you're an employer and you know you're older, and so you've got your house paid off, and you are farther along in your career, so you're a little bit, you know, you've got your needs more met. It can be really easy to forget what younger families are actually paying, right? So this is a reminder of some of these costs. The other thing that's so important that I have just found over and over and over again is in these lower wage jobs, people do think, and the employers tend to think in terms of an hourly wage. When you translate that to what is that as annual income, they're shocked because they just haven't done the math. So having the hourly wage showing up of say $37.43, they're like, oh my gosh, that's so much per hour. Well, all right, so can you live on $65,000 a year? Well, no way,
Right, exactly.
but they're the same thing.
Quite the two, right?
Right? So part of this is like, the value of this is to be able to have a conversation and to be able to build awareness and education around these issues because, you know, this is not mandated. This is guidelines.
Right, well, and this is actual cost.
Right.
So, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, great points. I agree 100% with the conversation and agree 100% too with, you know, not selecting out the higher value or lower. I might have assumed that or read that in, but if we're talking about paring down from 6, I kind of assumed that the single parent, 2 children would stay in being the high water mark, and then either the single person or the 2 adults, no children would be in there, and you know, and maybe throw 2 adults, 2 children, or, you know, some way around that, but kind of having that whole range to invite the conversation, because I think as Ellen alluded to, no matter how many you put in here, even if you put 12 in here, people would still be looking at, oh, well, my children are 4 and 6, I got a 1 and 2, so there's more diapers, or I got a 12 and 14, so they're eating all this. And, you know, I think a more important thing is starting the conversation. I guess the question would be, is it more, you know, if you had, say, 3, you know, people's heads can usually get around 3 more easily, but for that conversation starter, but also if you worked in, I think as I referenced before, the components of calling out those components of where they are, both as Ellen says, crosswalking that, making it clear as the report does, the hourly wage to that annual budget, but then also those factors that work in there, particularly the housing, the transportation, the childcare, and healthcare. I was thinking really is the fourth that really flips a lot. It's not, that one doesn't range by county, but it does vary a lot as far as if you know, what your employer's policy is for paying or not paying or letting you go, you know, through the marketplace or whatnot. And I think having those pieces called out in the report, not necessarily in this top level number, but it helps facilitate that conversation and helps employers, I think, to be able to say, oh, we're doing good because we're doing X, Y, and Z as far as providing these costs or options or being in a place where there is better housing than other parts of the state, or, who knows what the case may be. But I think for that reason, I would encourage us to look at narrowing the 6 down to ideally to 3 and keeping that single parent, 2 children as one of the 3.
So I'm cognizant that we're at time, and I just want us to give either ourselves permission to go to 12:15 or permission to begin again at our next meeting and make some of it, because we've made a lot of decisions. We're moving along, and we have one last meeting, right? And you're going to say this is not, that we have to do more, right, Patrick?
Ideally,
Yes, I
we
hear this.
with decisions today, because the plan for the next meeting
Is to review.
is
the
to
report.
review the report. Theoretically, there's a couple of things to consider.
Okay, so I realize that what time, how much longer right now are we going to need to make those decisions, in your humble opinion?
Well, I've gotten through everything except this conversation you're having right now about the family configurations. Other than that, I was just going to list all the decisions you made. That is basically just me going down a list. That'd be fast. Just one thing I would offer for this conversation. We just had the conversation about childcare. Two of the family configurations are going to converge quite a bit more closely with each other once we make that change. And that's the 2 adults, 2 children, but one of them has only one major.
That is my comment. Yeah.
So the childcare for that, I mean, we're greatly reducing the cost of childcare for the 2 earner household, because we assume the one where there's only one wage earner, the non-wage earner is providing the childcare.
Big assumption. I'm not sure.
It's the assumption that's used in the report.
Can I make a recommendation
Yeah,
to put on the table?
yeah. I just need a notion, how much longer are we willing to go right this minute? That's my first question for you. Because I would propose either we go to 12:15 or 12:30. Yeah.
I can stay.
Can we all stay for another 15 minutes?
I'd like
And aim at 12:20?
12:20 would be good. Yeah, I still have to get to Barry.
Okay, 12:20. Is that okay with everybody else? Okay, great.
I'm sorry, I do need to log off now, but I will be at the next meeting.
Okay, Aaron, do you have any thoughts before you log off on the categories? Keep all 6 or go to try and winnow it down to 3 or 4?
I'm thinking.
Yeah,
Can
Rich,
I ask a question? At what point does JFO squeal?
if we add 7 and 8.
Is 6 your, where you start to really squeal? I want to do as much as we can, but be respectful of JFO.
Exactly, that's my
And I think
exact.
that's I don't want you going out of the room squealing and going, so what point do you squeal?
Let me put it this way. I think that you should only remove family configurations if you feel strongly that they aren't really useful. The number that we have, so in the authorizing bill for this committee, they said that you could request up to 7. It said up to 7, so you have latitude to, theoretically, you can add another one if you want. But if you do want to sort of streamline, make the report, maybe, I don't know if this makes it simpler, but theoretically, if it makes it simpler for the user to use it, you could consider removing some.
Right. So I've got Aaron, who I know has to leave, and then Elizabeth will go to you. Aaron, did that give you time to think?
Allison, I've got to go. This is Elizabeth.
Oh, okay.
I can't stay any longer, but I would prefer keeping the 6.
Okay, even if we, okay, so 2 adults, 2 children and 1 wage earner, you really think that's still important?
In my own household, it is.
Okay.
But yeah, I do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Elizabeth, thanks so much for participating from the airport. We're
Thanks
very
for letting
grateful.
me.
Yeah,
Bye for
bye.
now.
And good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah. Aaron, any thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like unless the group in totality feels an overwhelming need to reduce the number that they're not relevant, then it would be a safer space to maintain them. There are going to be people to which those additional two categories are relevant.
Right, and probably several more, but I think we're trying to, yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
And remember, our report will be a draft report, which we can change also next week, next time we meet.
Yes, you will have the option next meeting if you want us to make some tweaks to it. You know, you adopt it with the understanding we're gonna add something that you want to change.
Richard,
I just asked, I need to get out of here. Could you summarize in an email what this is? Because I know you wanted to go through all that. And
Oh, the decision points?
yeah,
Sure.
and if you summarize that, then you might get an email back.
I always expect an email back.
Yeah,
from
I'm
you,
just
Richard.
saying.
West.
you know.
Okay, so, but before you leave, you are feeling how about these categories?
I'd like as many categories as I can get, as long as JFO doesn't come back in the budget process and saying, you made my life so difficult that we have to ask for a budget increase. Yes,
Oh, that may be around the corner.
I'm just saying.
I hear you. Okay. Okay, so we will be, the crowd left at this table will then make a draft decision and go forward. And I think I would love to get them to 4 if we could, because I think single parent, one child is, do we really need, I mean, it strikes me that we could get rid of 2 of these, single parent, one child, and 2 adults, one wage earner with 2 children, or do 2 adults with 2 older children. Because right now we're only dealing with young kids. So, which is an assumption that I think, is,
Teenagers eat a lot.
well, and teenagers cost a lot more because of college. So the cost of having older children, as I know, having gone through all these older children, you hemorrhage a lot more actually with older children than you do with younger children. And I've done all of it. So
But college isn't counted in here, right? There's not an assumption. There's nowhere in here that they're saving for college. Right, so that doesn't matter.
there is an assumption that you're saving.
Well, but it's not in here. There's not a line
It's
item,
not explicitly called out.
but there's not a line item for it either. It's not in the 5%.
Only talk-
5% is like, maybe it's college, maybe it's, your vacation fund, it's.
Oh,
Maybe it's living,
5%.
as a retired person.
college.
Okay. So it sounds like people are feeling like, keep the categories, but are the categories right? If we keep 6, are they the right categories?
Can I ask a question about the 2? So my argument was to get rid of the 1 wage earner, 2 children, 2 adults. Only because of the new child subsidy.
Yeah,
And like, what will that look like compared to 2 adults,
2 wagers.
2 wage earners? Like, are they going to look kind of identical? They
maybe
can't
we
really.
can cross-reference
Still.
things quickly here. I don't have the report in front of me, but I think
You have this that you just did.
Right?
yeah, but if you have the.
Yeah.
Here, on this sheet, it should tell us that.
If you have the number for the 2 adults, 1 wage earner household, I can tell you that the 2 adults, 2 children, with 2 wage earners household, that is moving from, 45.76 down to 44.26
Per hour.
per hour.
It's
So wait, say that one more time, sorry. The 2 adults.
on this sheet.
Yes.
Oh.
It's here.
Slide 16.
Oh, right, okay.
It's here and it goes from an annual income without tax credits.
Oh, sorry, I'm talking about the childcare subsidies on slide 19 or 16, sorry.
Oh, slide 6.
Slide 16.
How the hell do you see it? Oh, I see. Very faint.
Okay. So, I see. So 2 adults, 2 children per earner is, yeah, so, okay. So it's kind of the same.
if you were going to get rid of one JFO, which one would you get rid of, or two?
Well, I don't want to advocate for getting rid of them because of course it will always apply to some.
This bill.
It's the same exact.
Yeah, so I think with the childcare subsidy change, the one wage earner, and the, two with two children, those are going to converge.
So I would, yeah, then I would put on the table that we get rid of that 2 adults, 2 children, 1 wage earner category. I think that's what I'm hearing from
I
Jay.
think that could be appropriate, given the recent changes.
Okay,
That's what I would say too.
and I know you're going to be cross with me for saying this, but is there an additional category to replace it that is appropriate? Given our conversations? Just have to explore that.
I think if there's something you felt,
I'm getting darts.
I think if there was something you felt strongly about adding, the committee could consider it.
And, okay, in wearing the elimination hat, if we get rid of that, is it also getting rid of, we have 3 single adult scenarios here, a single person, a single parent with 1 kid, and a single person with 2 kids. Is it worth getting rid, is it at all worth getting rid of one of those? That's a lot of singles.
I don't think that there's a particularly strong case. The single by themselves represents quite a lot of Vermonters.
Yeah.
And there is a significant difference especially if you're a single parent, when you go from 1 to 2 children. So
Okay, so then you think that it's worth keeping them. But your recommendation would be, and I think my recommendation also would be to get rid of the 2 adults, 2 children, 1 wage earner.
I would almost say 2 adults, no children would be better to get rid of than the single with 1.
that's the official wage.
Oh, that's the official.
That's the official.
Okay, never mind.
That's the one that's kind of untouchable.
Okay.
And on that one, though, I would really like to put on the table for the 2 adults, no children, that we get rid of the assumption that they are married and because of the 1 bedroom versus 2 bedroom.
Oh, golly. That's got, I know Doug likes that, but the challenge with that is that there are tax implications and there are housing implications that are big and expensive and different. Shared call. If you're not married, you aren't necessarily,
Right.
you just 2 people, that means more, you need 2 bedrooms. It means you need 2, more cars. It means you're not saving anything on taxes.
But wait,
Oh, I see what you're getting at.
What happens?
The wage goes up.
The wage goes up, yeah.
and as we talked about, there aren't a lot of 1 bedroom places, so it's also more realistic.
Then we talked
We
that
need to
thing.
build more 1 bedroom. What's realistic is we need to build more 1 bedroom places. I think Richie, and maybe I'll go into the development business with Richie.
Anyway,
Just to the point on changing that assumption, I just circle back to the figures that see here. The cohort of households that are 2 adults, no children, skew much more heavily towards them being married or cohabitating.
Yeah,
Right.
So,
I would leave it.
I mean, you could consider possibly, and what I'm about to say does create a little extra work from us, but you could consider having a single person in shared housing assumption. That would be an additional configuration that doesn't currently exist.
Well, it could be a subcategory under single person.
Effectively, it would shake out to being a new configuration.
Yeah, I like that. I think for the reason too, rather than looking at the 2 adults, no children, kind of if they're, cohabitating where I think it goes into where they would be potentially sharing a budget, I think they'd be more likely to either be married or in that group, like we said, if not married, maybe there's tax implications, but I think when you're looking at the budget and, I think it's really for the single person there. I think differentiating that, we said, between the shared housing and the single person, for that reason, that I think just looking at the single, assuming that a single person is in one bedroom, that I think we'll suss out differently if we say in shared housing. So I like the idea of doing single person and shared housing.
Time.
We can do that.
I need to see you.
So change, so not have just single person at the meeting that they're in a one bedroom. Rather, the single person would change to be single person living in shared housing.
There would be some degree of cost sharing in other categories that we would assume. But overall, it's going to be likely pretty similar with the biggest difference coming in the housing budget.
I think that makes sense to me, given the reality of sort of like, there's just not.
Can't live by
You
yourself.
just can't, right? And I think people will get that more. And that way, we're not adding another one, we're actually still taking one out. So we're going from 6 down to 5 households. And we're keeping the 2 households, or 2 adult households are assumed to be in a relationship,
So 2 adults, no children.
Are in a relationship.
are in a relationship. Single, no children is in a cohabitating environment. So there's.
Sure.
So we're going to add that assumption.
So I think what I was saying is to keep the single person living alone, because going back to the
Just adding it.
demographics discussion, there are a lot of Vermonters who are single and living alone. And that number has actually been increasing, but to add the single shared housing.
Shared housing. Yeah, I heard you.
We're going down to 5, but we're back up to 6.
Ah,
Okay.
There, you have to notice, this is at JFO's suggestion.
see, I'd almost rather take, if I had to choose and keep it at 6, I'd rather take a married couple with kids out of daycare and see what that cost is. Kids that are in like, still living at home, but don't have that daycare expense,
Wait,
which is
Oh, the older children?
the older children. Yeah.
well, that's a consider.
I don't want to add a 7th. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I get more value out of that than the single person, you know? Because listen, a single person is going to look at the number and say, oh, well, I'm actually going to spend less on housing because I'm going to share, right? So I don't need to.
So I'm going to tag onto that question, which is, how many Vermonters do we know are single? And how many Vermonters are married with kids of some variety? Remind us where that is.
Sure, just let me pull up the present.
Because if there are more people that are married with kids, I think about that as a safe category rather than the single with shared housing.
And it has to be under 65, because that's what we're talking about. Yeah.
You're assuming people stop earning money after 60.
No, but that's this budget is 65. It stops, right?
Which is, I think,
The budget stops at age 65. We're not including 65-year-olds in this.
I use that assumption. Well, yes. So yes, it's someone, you're not qualifying for social
okay,
security
we're
assumption.
at 12:20, so we need to I think we should make this decision ASAP. Because you have to leave to go to Barry on a bike.
On a page.
I know, I'm hip here.
Just trying to figure.
Is this too rushed?
No, we can make it a tentative decision and then we can revisit it at our next meeting.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Or we can have options incorporated in the report and then we can make a decision. If we want to do that, given our time frame, maybe that's the way to go. I would propose actually then that we have these as options for us to make a decision on with a draft report.
Okay. Would you like me to review the decisions you've made?
Very quickly.
All right. So for food, we're moving from the 10-year differential down to the 5-year.
Correct.
For housing, we're not making changes. Transportation, we're maintaining the existing methodology, knowing that it's going to be updated. The survey is going to be updated every 2 years. No changes on healthcare or dental care. On childcare, we're going to include the subsidies. For clothing and household expenses, we are going to add the cost of a computer. No change for rental insurance, term life insurance, or savings. On taxes, we are going to continue to include the tax credits. For family configurations, we are going to add a single shared housing and we're putting a pin in.
We have options of adding we're getting rid of the one-wage earner.
Mhm.
And we're going to have options of choose one,
Yep.
single, shared housing, or adult, 2 adults, 2 older children.
We are going to maintain the urban versus rural distinction with the recommendation that the livable wage is also distinguished that way and not an average between the two. And we are going to add personal care products as a new spending category.
And the child subsidy.
Yes, I mentioned that.
Okay.
Yes, we're going to continue with the existing methodology and include the subsidies. And I will send a summary of that to the folks who had to sign up early.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Well,
So just to remind everybody, we are next meeting in November.
It's going to be a spooky meeting.
We're sorry, what?
It's a spooky meeting.
31st is spooky.
Halloween is our next meeting.
No, it's not.
Yes, it
It's
is.
November 2nd.
No,
It's October 31st.
In the morning.
It isn't.
You were gonna wear a costume.
Oh, so that was our other option, was November 2nd,
which we decided not to do.
which we decided not to do. Okay, I am going to be dead meat. Oh, sorry, I'm still alive. I will.
Got you back from your trip. We talked about that too.
Yeah, I know we did.
And you said.
Okay, I think we're adjourned. Let's go off digital life here.